It's a great privilege to see so many of you here. Thank you for coming. I live in Hackney, so for me, coming here felt like journeying to the edge of the world. I felt like I was going to fall off and be swallowed by sea monsters. So the trip was worth it because this is, as I'm sure you'll agree, the most remarkable space. So I'm pleased to be here and thank you all for coming. I wanted to introduce you to the closest thing that the economics profession has to Mr. Spock. Now, those of you who know economists will know that there must be a lot of competition for the closest thing the economics profession has to Mr. Spock. But you know, I can tell you all about him tonight. His name is Gary Becker. He is a grandfather. He is tall. He's in his late 70s, wispy white hair, thin skin, slim. He's charming in an old school sort of way. I quite enjoy his company. And he won the Nobel Prize for economics a few years ago. He won the Nobel Prize for applying economics to everyday life. Now, when I say applying economics to everyday life, I'm not talking about the kind of things that I wrote about in the Undercover Economist. We're talking about the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks or Costa, or what Tesco's do to you when you, I guess this crowd will be Waitrose, right? But anyway, what the supermarkets do, sorry, East London boy, what the supermarkets do when you walk in through the door. That I wrote about in the Undercover Economist, but that's not what Becker is all about. That's not what he does when he applies economics to everyday life. Becker is doing something a little bit more audacious. Becker believes that we can develop an economic theory of marriage, of an economic theory of racial discrimination, an economic theory of drug addiction, an economic theory of crime. Now, an economic theory of marriage sounds like a story about gold digging. That's not what it's about, because economics isn't necessarily about money. Economics is about the way that people respond to incentives. And Becker and I believe that we are all subconsciously very good at weighing up costs and benefits, weighing up risks and rewards. But these costs and benefits don't have to be financial, they don't have to be monetary. They could be anything that reasonably strikes you as a cost or a benefit. So a risk of getting sick is a cost. The ability to spend time with somebody you love is a benefit. So the point is not to narrow the field down to financial analysis. The point is to say, with all of these areas of life that are not financial, nevertheless, we're subconscious calculators. We are weighing up costs and benefits, and we are surprisingly rational. The most surprising people in the most surprising circumstances are rational. We all have an inner Mr. Spock just bursting to get out. Anyway, that's the idea, but let me tell you a story that Becker told when he was accepting his Nobel Prize. It may give you more of a sense about at least where he's coming from. He told the story of running late to examine a student who was studying for his PhD. Now, those of you who have any contact with academia will know the day you are examined for your PhD is the most important day of your academic life. It's incredibly nerve-wracking. The idea that the examiner just might not show up or might show up an hour late, it's inconceivable. It would be humiliating for the examiner. And Becker, as he rushed in his car to the examination schools, was thinking to himself, this is so embarrassing, I'm going to feel so awkward, I'm going to feel like a bad person, my reputation will be damaged. These are all costs. Not monetary costs, but they're all costs. But being a resourceful fellow, he realized there was a way that he could avoid all of these costs. He could simply drive all the way to the examination schools, park illegally right outside, and walk in. But that then, that decision would bring its own costs. Then he might get a parking ticket. How much is a parking ticket these days? Is it £10? Is it £20? Is it £50? £100? How likely would he be to get towed? If he was towed, how much time would it take to get the car back from the pound? He figured it all out. He was an economist. He figured it all out. And as he was figuring it all out, he thought to himself, I have just laid the foundations of an economic theory of crime, a theory of rational crime, committed by rational criminals who weigh up the costs and benefits before their actions. He was quite pleased with himself. He parked illegally, he walked in, he sat down on time, leaned forward, and said to the student, "How would you go about laying the foundations of an economic theory of crime?" There's a happy ending to the story. The student passed, and Gary Becker didn't get a ticket. That worked out very well, and I was reminded of this story when I went to interview Becker at his home in Chicago. One of the things I was trying to do in The Logic of Life was not just explore economic ideas, but to introduce you to these rather strange characters called economists, and especially the top economists, the most original, the most creative, the most influential. They are interesting people. They're sometimes a bit too interesting. And I wanted to give people a sense of what it is like to meet these strange creatures, these Spocks who walk among us. And so I interviewed as many of them as I could. And so it was that I went to Chicago to interview Gary Becker, Nobel laureate, one of the most famous economists on the planet. He introduced me to his wife, showed me around his home, and then we agreed that, we'd agreed before that I would carry out the interview over a long, leisurely lunch. So we got into his car and he drove me to the restaurant. Now, I don't know to this day whether he was winding me up, but he then drove straight into the 20 minutes only space outside the restaurant. I looked at him a little quizzically, and he looked at me, and I looked at him again, and he turned to me. I'm afraid I can't do the Brooklyn accent, but he turned to me and said, "I think we'll be fine. They don't check that closely." So immediately I said, "Was that a rational crime?" And immediately he said, "Yes, it was." So there you have it. There you have the economic vision of the economics of everything. A world of slightly odd, consciously calculating, Spock-like creatures walking around, weighing up the costs and benefits before committing parking offences. Except, possibly you find that tremendously persuasive. Possibly you don't. I hope you don't. Because it is a powerful theory, it is a powerful idea, but it doesn't really satisfy, does it? Because it's one thing to say that a septuagenarian, Nobel Prize winner in economics, weighs up costs and benefits before contemplating a parking offence. It's another thing to say that a 15-year-old with a knife, with a gun, member of a gang, weighs up the costs and benefits of punishment before contemplating mayhem. And that's actually what we would want to know. We don't want an economic theory of crime that predicts criminal behaviour committed only by economists. We want an economic theory of crime that tells us something about how everybody else, like criminals, for example, how they behave. So let me tell you another story which really drove this home to me. It doesn't have the same happy ending. I used to live in Washington, D.C. not long ago. And 3 summers ago, my wife and I were walking along 15th Street, having just bought a couple of ice cream cones. It was a sticky June summer evening. Washington, D.C. gets very hot in the summer. And we had our ice cream, Sweet Licks, by the way, Sweet Licks Ice Cream Parlour on 17th and R. It's excellent. And that's relevant, by the way, because there are many excellent little places in this area. There are some very nice coffee shops. There's a good bar, a couple of good restaurants that are not too expensive. And a lot of people just wandering around the neighbourhood, enjoying themselves, enjoying the cafes, sitting on the stoops outside their homes, watching the world go by. Very pleasant. And so we were surprised. My wife and I were walking along, hot and sticky. I was hotter and stickier than she was because I had a 13-month-old daughter in a baby carrier on my back, eating our ice cream, and we were surprised when our conversation was interrupted by a scream from across the street.